portrait of a gentleman, painted by Greco around the turn of the 16th century. On the surface, just appears to be a painting of an aristocrat. However, this man has created much more meaning than to represent personal admiration, to be hung over the gentleman's mantle. When we look at art, it is often brought to question the story or significance that is found within it. We sometimes think about the inspirations the author had or the value the art would sell for. However, we often neglect to think about the variation of meaning that one piece can have for many. One person can look at an identical piece of art and yet see something totally different. This is what's important about art. Art is a tangible item that represents something significant to us.
So what's the significance of an old portrait?
Well, it's not specifically about the portrait itself, but what it represents and the story that is behind it that would develop into this representation. The portrait of a gentleman was painted by the famous painter Greco. The painting was obtained by a Jewish industrialist and an art collector by the name of Julius Priester. Mr. Priester resided in Vienna, Austria during the time that the Nazis took over. In 1938, Mr. Priester decided to leave Vienna to flee from the imminent dangers that came with the Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria. Mr. Priester entrusted his collection with a friend while he temporarily spent his time in Paris with his wife, until 1940 when Mr. Priester moved to Mexico City. However, a few years later, in 1944, the Gestapo obtained his collection. The Gestapo were specialized military police for the Nazis. The Nazis were known for taking belongings away from the Jewish people. The Gestapo found much different meaning in the painting than did Mr. Priester. Following the war, Mr. Priester made many efforts to regain his precious art collection. Unfortunately, Mr. Priester was unable to find the artwork before his death. The Greco painting was sold to a Frederick Mott, who obtained the painting from a dealer who worked with the Gestapo. To the Gestapo, the painting was just a way to make some extra cash. The Nazis had no respect for cultural items that weren't considered their own. To the Nazis, the painting was nothing more than a canvas that somebody would pay a significant amount of money for. In reality, art is much more than that. If it doesn't have direct meaning to us, we can find meaning through what others see it for. For Frederick Mott and previous owner Julius Priester, Greco, being the artist, was a significant reason for why the painting of a man, or a gentleman, was considered significant. Greco was born in Crete, Greece. He is known for painting many religious pieces. Greco traveled most of Europe, mimicking the styles of other famous painters and artists at that time. Greco was considered a mannerist. Mannerism was a style of art that occurred during the 16th century that would often reflect certain parts of the body disproportionately. In other portraits by Greco and in Portrait of a Gentleman, you can see it in the elongation of the face. This is done to make the face stand out. Greco painted many paintings throughout his life. The most amount of money one of his paintings sold for, that was known by the public, was about $12 million. Portrait of a Gentleman was considered to be worth a significant amount, given that it was an Greco painting. Mr. Priester published his collection following the war in hopes he would have some of his artwork returned to him. After the painting was sold by the Gestapo to Frederick Mott, the painting made its way to New York in 1953. Mr. Priester attempted to persecute Frederick Mott, but Mott denied ever having it, which resulted in a dead end in finding the painting's location. Unfortunately, Portrait of a Gentleman would never be returned to him before his death. Upon Mr. Priester's death in 1954, his heirs continued to search for his lost artwork. Through the many years that it was missing, it finally surfaced, held by a London dealer. This London dealer put up the painting for sale in New York in June of 2014. Shortly after, the Commission for Looted Art in Europe, who were previously commissioned to find the painting in 2003, discovered the sale. They immediately put in a request to get it back. The co-chair of the Commission for Looted Art, Ann Weber, said the dealer acted admirably as soon as he realized the painting's true history, and we were able to negotiate a deal to return the painting to Mr. Priester's heirs, who now live in Britain. When the painting was returned to the heirs of Mr. Priester, they were overwhelmed with joy when they discovered that it was in its original frame. Artwork has many different meanings for many people. For Mr. Priester, the painting was important because it belonged to him, and it was a significant part of his private collection. For Greco, it was a way for him to portray a gentleman by using his gift for creativity. For the Gestapo, the painting was a way to get a bit of easy money by selling art that didn't belong to them. For the heirs to Mr. Priester, Portrait of a Gentleman signified closure, as one of the many stolen pieces of art were never returned to Mr. Priester. The painting was a reminder of Julius Priester and what was left behind, and loss of his home and belongings following the annexation of Austria and his move to Mexico. Now, what meaning can we find through this painting? We can see and discover that there is a history behind it. The painting signifies the wrongdoings of Nazi Germany. It and why we should protect art. We also can see why art holds value. Portrait of a Gentleman holds value because of its history.
Being an old painting means it represents a cultural time of the ancient past. Art is something that holds cultural and personal value, and even if it may not be apparent to the modern viewer, as it is an old portrait, it is still art.
From this painting, we can think about the justification or whether it should have been returned to Mr. Priester's heirs or sold to the highest bidder. Once art is created, meaning can still develop from it centuries later.
Whether we all see the meaning in art, or we fail to find the deeper meaning behind it,
It's important to respect all meanings and views that it holds.